China's unilateral Cold War. Against the United States, China is engaged in a new form of geopolitical Cold War competition with the United States characterized by ideological differences, military posturing, and economic rivalry. China's goal is to replace the United States as the world leader and seeking world domination. Over the years, China has grown as a global power, both economically and militarily. Its Belt and Road Initiative is an example of its efforts to expand its influence through infrastructure projects in various countries. China's leaders have also expressed a desire for a greater role in shaping global governance, including the reform of international institutions like the United Nations. While China has pursued their goal of replacing the United States as the world leader, the U.S. leadership of both parties has taken no action, allowing the Chinese to have free access to the United States, while China has restricted U.S. citizens' access to China. The Chinese Communist Party. China went through significant political and social changes after World War II. The Chinese Civil War between the Chinese Nationalist Party, Kuomintang, and the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, resumed after World War II and resulted in the victory of the CCP in 1949. This led to the establishment of the People's Republic of China under the leadership of Mao Zedong. After the communist takeover, China became isolated from many Western countries, particularly the United States, during the Soviet Cold War era. This isolation was due to ideological differences and geopolitical tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union, with China aligning itself more closely with the Soviet Union during this period. Over time, China's foreign policy evolved, and it began to open up to the world in the late 1970s under the leadership of Deng Xiaoping, implementing economic reforms and adopting a more outward-looking approach. This period of opening up, known as reform and opening up, marked a significant shift in China's foreign policy and economic strategy, leading to the country's rapid economic growth and increased engagement with the global community. World War II. The United States provided support to both the nationalist Chinese, led by Chiang Kai-shek, and the communist Chinese, led by Mao Zedong, in their common struggle against Japanese aggression. The primary goal was to aid China as a whole in resisting Japanese invasion and occupation. Initially, the United States did not take sides in the Chinese Civil War, which resumed after World War II and eventually led to the victory of the communist forces in 1949. The United States did not support the communist government in China after it took power in 1949. In fact, the U.S. did not recognize the People's Republic of China, PRC, led by the Chinese Communist Party under Mao Zedong as the legitimate government of China. Instead, the United States continued to recognize the Republic of China, ROC, which had retreated to the island of Taiwan after losing the Chinese Civil War to the Communists. The Soviet Cold War. The United States maintained diplomatic relations with the ROC on Taiwan and provided military and economic assistance to Taiwan for several decades. This policy of non-recognition of the PRC and support for Taiwan was a result of the Cold War dynamics, with the United States viewing the ROC as a bulwark against the spread of communism in East Asia. The Korean War. China intervened in the Korean War in late 1950, sending Chinese troops to support North Korea. This intervention changed the course of the war and eventually led to a stalemate. The Korean War ended in 1953 with an armistice agreement that maintained the division of North and South Korea along the 38th parallel, with China remaining closely aligned with North Korea. The Nixon administration. It wasn't until the early 1970s, during the Nixon administration, that the United States began the process of normalizing relations with the People's Republic of China. This led to the establishment of formal diplomatic relations in 1979, and the U.S. switched its recognition from Taiwan to the PRC. However, the U.S. continued to maintain unofficial relations with Taiwan and provides it with arms and support for its security. This one China policy continues to shape U.S.-China relations to this day. The World Trade Organization. China entered the World Trade Organization, WTO, during the presidency of Bill Clinton and was finalized in the early days of the George W. Bush administration on December 11, 2001. Its accession to the WTO marked a significant milestone in China's economic development and integration into the global economy. The United States encouraged China to join the WTO to bring China into a rules-based international trading system. The hope was that increased trade and integration into the global economy would lead to political reforms and a more cooperative relationship between the two nations. However, over the years, China has violated WTO rules, leading to trade disputes that continue today. Doing business in China. Doing business in China can be a lucrative opportunity due to its large market and rapidly growing economy. However, there are restrictions and challenges that foreign businesses encounter when operating in China. China has historically imposed restrictions on foreign ownership in various industries. There are sectors where foreign ownership is limited or prohibited, and the regulatory environment can be complex and opaque. Intellectual protection is a significant concern. Counterfeiting and theft have been issues in China, and enforcing intellectual property rights is a lengthy and costly process. In some industries, state-owned enterprises dominate the market, which make it difficult for foreign businesses to compete on a level playing field. China has stringent data localization laws that require certain data to be stored within China's borders. This can affect how foreign companies handle customer data and sensitive information. China has implemented a cybersecurity law that places restrictions on the cross-border transfer of data and imposes security requirements on network operators. Compliance with these regulations can be challenging. China has historically required many foreign businesses to have a Chinese partner, especially in certain industries and sectors. The Chinese partner would typically hold a significant ownership stake in the joint venture. Owning land in China. In China, the ownership of land is restricted, and it is not possible for foreign individuals or entities to own land outright. Foreign companies and individuals can lease land use rights for a specified period, typically 40 to 70 years. These leases are obtained through negotiations with the local government and are subject to various regulations and restrictions. Swaying public opinion and stealing technology. Through education, the Chinese government has been perusing a two-prong attack against the United States through the educational system, stealing technology and swaying public opinion. Universities throughout the United States have been collaborating with Chinese researchers, hosting Chinese students, researchers, or visiting professors. The number of Chinese nationals in the United States universities went from 900 scientists in 2010 to 2,621 in 2021. In recent years, at least a dozen have been prosecuted. In addition, there were 262,992 Chinese students attending universities in the U.S. between January 2020 and January 2023. Buying influence and access at high levels. Anonymous Chinese donations to the University of Pennsylvania Biden Center for foreign-funded salaries to President Biden's closest political allies to influence a future government. The Penn Biden Center appears to have acted as a foreign-sponsored source of income for much of a Biden administration in waiting. The question that needs to be asked is how many of our politicians, corporate and educational leaders have come under the influence of the Chinese. Technology theft. China's stealing U.S. technology has been a prominent issue in U.S.-China relations for many years. China has been engaging in cyber espionage activities aimed at stealing sensitive intellectual property and technology from U.S. companies and government agencies. These cyber attacks can involve hacking into computer systems to steal valuable data. China has been recruiting individuals within the U.S. or persuading employees of U.S. companies to share proprietary information and trade secrets. Chinese nationals working in U.S. research institutions have been directed to gather information or technology for the Chinese government. Chinese companies have been acquiring U.S. technology through mergers and acquisitions, joint ventures, or partnerships with U.S. firms. In some cases, technology transfer agreements have raised concerns about the transfer of sensitive technology to China. Chinese companies have been reverse engineering products developed by U.S. companies, allowing them to replicate the technology without the original developer's consent. Chinese spies or operatives have been physically stealing sensitive technology, research, or trade secrets from U.S. companies. United States dependence on China. Over several decades, there has been a significant shift in manufacturing from the United States to China. 40.6% of our imports come from China. Chinese products account for roughly 1 out of every $6 Americans spend on imports. Some industries, particularly electronics, textiles, and certain consumer goods, have seen substantial offshoring to China. As of September 2021, China is a significant global supplier of pharmaceutical ingredients and products. 23.6% of pharmaceutical imports come from China. China is a major producer of active pharmaceutical ingredients, which are the essential components in pharmaceutical drugs. Many generic drugs are dependent on Chinese manufacturing as well as a considerable number of finished pharmaceutical products, including over-the-counter drugs and prescription medications. Corporate America has become dependent on China. Replacing the dollar as the world currency. In 2016, the International Monetary Fund, IMF, included the renminbi, RMB, in its special drawing rights, SDR basket, alongside the US dollar, euro, yen, and British pound. This was a significant recognition of the RMB's status as a global reserve currency. In September 2021, China had been taking several steps to internationalize its currency, the renminbi, RMB, or yuan, to challenge the dominance of the US dollar as world's primary reserve currency. China entered into currency swap agreements with several countries, allowing them to conduct trade and settle transactions in RMB instead of the US dollar. As of June of 2023, China was one of the largest foreign holders of U.S. debt in the amount of $859.4 billion. China benefits from the United States movement to renewable energy. China is a major producer of renewable energy technology, including solar panels, wind turbines, and electric vehicle components. As the U.S. increases its demand for renewable energy infrastructure, the United States becomes more dependent on China. Chinese manufacturers accounted for nearly 87% of U.S. battery imports in the fourth quarter of 2022. China is a signatory of the Kyoto Agreement while it gets about 55% of its energy from coal as of 2021. In 2022, China approved the construction of 106 gigawatts worth of coal-fired powered capacity. While the United States is struggling with high-price renewable energy as it attempts to meet the Kyoto Agreement goals, China continues to use coal, a low-cost energy source but a high source of CO2, playing lip service with the promise of reducing CO2 in the future. Competing with China. Competing with China on a global scale involves addressing a wide range of economic, technological, geopolitical, and social factors. The first task is to recognize that China has been waging an economic war against the United States. The United States needs to pursue fair and balanced trade policies that protect American interests while engaging with China on trade negotiations to address issues like intellectual property theft, market access, and unfair trade practices. Strengthen export controls on sensitive technologies and promote diversification of supply chains to reduce dependence on China for critical components. Presently, the 2022 trade deficit with China is $382.9 billion. To correct this imbalance, the United States must, by executive order, institute a policy of reciprocity, the practice of exchanging privileges granted by one country to another. If China restricts the ownership of land in China, then Chinese nationalists should not be allowed to own land in the U.S. If China requires a U.S. company doing business in China to have a Chinese partner, the same goes for any Chinese company in the U.S. If China requires any U.S. company doing business in China to transfer their technology, The same goes for a Chinese company doing business in the U.S. The second action that needs to be taken is to require a 100% offset in trade. This means that for every dollar spent on imports from China, China must spend the equivalent importing from the United States. The transition to zero trade balance could be achieved over a 4-year period, requiring a 25% reduction each year. If the balance is not reached in any one year, the difference to be made up with tariffs on Chinese products imported into the United States. Prohibit Chinese nationalists and professors from attending U.S. universities and colleges. Prohibit Chinese nationalists from owning any social media company in the United States and deport all illegal Chinese immigrants. Finally, prohibit any Chinese financial support to any politician or government employee. Remember, we are in a cold war with China. If we are to win, we must take action now.